At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. Because, after all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Johnny. Let's begin. Roric Reynolds figured he had about 90 seconds before the galaxy's most famously inflexible judge turned him into a fine pink mist. He'd seen the vids. Molecular disintegration was High Judge Isolde Kahlo's signature flourish, a sentence delivered with the same dispassionate finality she applied to ordering her morning nutrient paste. He stood in the accused's column, a pillar of harsh white light in the center of the cavernous High Tribunal of the Galactic Concord. The air was sterile, cold, and smelled faintly of chilled, recycled air and the metallic tang of polished authority. All around him, tiers of delegates from 100 worlds watched, their breathing a collective suspended thing, their faces a bizarre menagerie of galactic evolution, from the gill-frilled amphibians of Aquaria to the stone-faced silicates of the chrysalis asteroid belt, were all united in their grim expectation. Before him, an Athelian prosecutor named Justinian, whose face was perpetually pinched in a state of smug superiority, finished his summation. His voice was reedy, each word landing like a carefully placed stone in a wall of condemnation. The evidence, High Judge, is incontrovertible. Flight logs from the orbital gate at Epsilon Eridani, cross-referenced with visual confirmation from 3 independent commercial freighters. Residual energy signatures on the hull of the transport stalwart shield that match the ion scrubbers unique to the suspect's vessel, the Stray Comet. The smuggler, Roric Reynolds, knowingly and with malicious intent, stole a Class Omega prototype weapon from a transport operating under the explicit protection of a Concord directive. He has violated the armistice of Corsaira, endangered galactic stability, and, through his crass defiance, spat in the face of this august body. The prosecution rests. The law demands but one conclusion. Isolde Kalos felt the familiar weight of the law settle upon her shoulders. It was a tangible thing, a cloak of absolute authority woven from centuries of precedent and statute. But lately, it felt less like a shield and more like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. She sat on the dais of polished black obsidian, her posture a study in preternatural stillness. It was a discipline hammered into her from youth, the culmination of the arduous Athelian rituals of focus, which taught that the body was merely a vessel for the mind, and both must be honed to a single, unwavering point of purpose. Her gaze, the color of deep amethyst and just as hard, fell upon the human swaggering in the light. Roric Reynolds. Justinian had presented a flawless case, a neat package of evidence tied with a bow of legal certainty. There was no room for interpretation, no ambiguity to explore. It was a closed system, perfect and suffocating. A specific memory, sharp and unwelcome, ghosted through her mind. A case from 3 standard years ago. An Athelian financier accused of corporate espionage against a rival clan with deep ties to the High Council. The evidence had been just as neat, the logic just as inescapable. She had delivered the guilty verdict without hesitation, her voice a perfect instrument of the law. Only later, much later, did she learn the truth, whispered to her by a disgraced clerk who had been crippled by his conscience. The financier was a scapegoat, his career and life sacrificed to protect a member of the High Council, a man named Tarsus, from a scandal that would have toppled him. The law, her ironclad god, had been used as a thug's cudgel. The doubt had been a hairline crack in the foundation of her life's work. Now, looking at this defiant human, a man who seemed to find the gravest moment of his life a source of amusement, she felt another tremor run along that crack. She pushed the memory away, locking it back in the mental vault where she kept all such weaknesses. She activated the dais' vocal amplifier. Her voice, crisp and devoid of warmth, filled the chamber. Each syllable perfectly formed, each tone calibrated for maximum authority. Roric Reynolds of the Terran Confederacy, you have heard the charges presented by Proctor Justinian. This tribunal finds the evidence compelling. You are found guilty on all counts. The sentence, given the extreme threat posed by your actions, is molecular disintegration, to be carried out immediately. A collective, silent breath was held across the gallery. Proctor Justinian gave a small, satisfied nod, the corners of his thin lips twitching into a self-congratulatory smirk. The bailiffs, two hulking Goliath maulers in polished chrome armor, moved forward. Their heavy footfalls were the only sound in the vast hall. One of them, his voice a low rumble from a vocalizer grill in his helmet, leaned toward Roric, the massive bulk of his armor eclipsing the light. Prisoner, do you have any last words? Roric's grin widened. It was an infuriatingly charming sight. Last words? Buddy, I'm just getting warmed up. He straightened up, the light catching the rebellious glint in his eyes, and he looked directly at Isolde. He ignored the gallery of silent, staring aliens. He ignored the advancing bailiffs, and he most certainly ignored the smug proctor. He spoke to her, and only her, his voice pitching to carry through the hall, not with volume, but with a startling conversational intimacy. Judge Kalos, he began, his tone casual, as if they were discussing the weather over a drink. I've got to hand it to you. That was a hell of a performance. The voice, the posture, the whole Ice Queen of Justice vibe. 10 out of 10. You really sell it. A low murmur rippled through the delegates. Such insolence was unheard of. Justinian's face tightened with indignation, his pale skin flushing an angry pink. Isolde's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of her annoyance. Her fingers, long and slender, rested on the obsidian dais. Your time is limited, Reynolds. Do not waste it on theatrics. Theatrics? Lady, you're the one putting on the show, Roric shot back, his tone sharpening, losing its playful edge and gaining the hardness of honed steel. You stand up there, wrapped in the law like it's some kind of holy blanket, but we both know it's just a rug you use to sweep the dirt under. You're nothing more than a hood ornament on a crooked machine. And I think the worst part is, you know it. The murmur grew louder, more agitated. Justinian stepped forward, his body rigid with fury. High Judge, the prisoner is mocking this court. He is committing contempt on a scale I have never witnessed. I demand— Silence, Proctor, Isolde commanded. Her voice was dangerously quiet, yet it cut through the rising clamor like a shard of glass. Justinian snapped his mouth shut, his expression a mask of stunned disbelief. She turned her unwavering gaze back to Roric. Let him speak. Roric's eyes bored into hers. He wasn't just looking at her. He was seeing her, a distinction she found deeply unsettling. That rifle, the one I stole, you think it's just some random piece of military hardware? Just another score for a common smuggler? My partner. She died getting the intel on that thing. She told me what it was. She told me who was behind it. It was commissioned with black budget funds, wasn't it? Funds that couldn't be traced through normal channels, funneled through the personal encrypted account of none other than High Counselor Tarsus. And who do you think he paid to build it? Not the Concord Army. Your friendly neighborhood terrorists, the Void Maw Syndicate. He was bluffing. He had to be. He was betting his life on the dying words of the woman he'd loved. He had no hard proof he could present, only her conviction and a single, desperate lead he'd followed across 3 star systems. You want to turn me into space dust for stealing it? Roric laughed, a raw, genuine sound that was utterly out of place in the sterile hall, a sound of wild, desperate life. I did you a favor. All the proof you need is inside that rifle's data log. Who armed it, who tested it, and who was tested on. But you won't look. You can't, because you know that if you pull on that one little thread, your whole pristine, orderly universe unravels, and you're terrified of the mess. He was challenging her, not her authority. That was a fortress she could defend with ease. He was challenging her integrity, the very core of her being. He was taking her deepest, most private doubt, the one born from the financier's case, and screaming it in a public forum for the entire galaxy to hear. A part of her, the logical, disciplined part that had governed her every action for decades, screamed at her to dismiss him, to give the signal, to silence this chaotic agent of disorder and restore the sanctity of her court. But another part, a primal, illogical spark she hadn't felt in years, flared to life deep within her. It was a feeling her Athelian tutors had warned her against, a dangerous human emotion. Fascination. Awe at his sheer, untamed audacity. He was wagering his life on a razor's edge, on the belief that she was better than the system she served, and on the word of a dead partner. To kill him now would be an admission, an execution of the truth. It would prove he was right, that she was afraid to look. Isolde Kalnos did something she had never done before. In a court built on predictable order, she chose chaos. She lifted her gavel, a heavy instrument of carved Jetran wood, and brought it down on the obsidian block. The crack echoed like a gunshot in the stunned hall. The sentence is stayed. A wave of shock washed over the gallery, a palpable physical thing. Proctor Justinian's face went from smug to apoplectic, his features contorting in disbelief. High Judge, on what grounds? The verdict has been rendered. This is procedural madness. The statutes are clear. Isolde stood, drawing herself up to her full height, her presence commanding the cavernous space. Her voice cut through the burgeoning noise with absolute, chilling authority. On the grounds that an allegation of criminal malfeasance against a sitting High Counselor, made under penalty of death, presents a unique and substantial threat of judicial compromise. Therefore, I am invoking the Judicial Sequestration Mandate, Article 11 Gamma. That silenced the hall completely. The mandate was a real, if archaic, piece of Concord law, a relic from a more turbulent era. It granted a high judge absolute unilateral authority to secure evidence and witnesses in matters that could threaten the integrity of the tribunal itself. It was a legal nuke, and it had not been used in over a century. Justinian stared, aghast, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The mandate, it requires a formal petition, a review by the full council. You cannot simply invoke it. I can, and I have, Isolde said, her voice a glacial calm that belied the storm raging within her. My authority in matters of potential judicial compromise is absolute, Proctor, as the text of the mandate makes explicitly clear. Your objection is noted for the record, and it is overruled." Her eyes found Roric's. He offered the barest hint of a nod, a flicker of acknowledgement. He had thrown the dice, and she had just picked them up. "Bailiffs, secure the prisoner and remove him to my personal custody. This tribunal is adjourned." An hour later, the political counterattack came. Isolde stood in the stark, white-paneled corridor outside Judicial Secure Holding Cell 12, a reinforced facility in the tribunal's sublevels under her direct and exclusive authority. Roric was inside. Her personal datapad chimed with an urgent, high-priority summons from the office of the High Council. The message was blunt, stripped of all diplomatic pleasantries. She was to cease her unsanctioned inquiry and release the prisoner back into the general penitentiary system for immediate processing. It was signed by two of High Counselor Tarsus's closest political allies. She typed her reply with a cold fury that made her fingers tremble slightly. "The judicial sequestration mandate is in effect. My authority in this matter is non-negotiable as per Concord Charter. Any attempt to interfere, direct or indirect, will be logged as obstruction of justice and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." She had sinned. She had just drawn her line in the sand, a line that separated her from the rest of the Concord's power structure. Tarsus had tried the political route and failed. She knew, with a chilling certainty born of her long years navigating these treacherous currents, what would come next. She entered the cell. The door slid shut behind her with a heavy, final thud. Roric was lounging on the single metal bunk, looking far too relaxed for a man who had been seconds from vaporization. The interrogation table between them was bare. "Took you long enough, Judge," he said, his voice echoing slightly off the bare walls. "Figured you were out there getting your story straight with the big wigs." "I was defying a direct order from the High Council," she stated, her voice tight with the strain of the last hour. "Which means whatever time we thought we had has now been reduced to minutes, perhaps seconds." "You made a claim, Reynolds. You bet your life on your partner's intel. Show me you weren't bluffing." "Wasn't bluffing about the proof, just about having seen it myself," he admitted, sitting up. He leaned forward, the playful glint in his eyes hardening into something more serious, more focused. "Ashley was the best slicer in the Outer Rim, a ghost in the machine. She got wind of this project, this singularity rifle, and she started digging. She dug too deep. They cornered her on a backwater moon in the Hadron Expanse. But before they did, she got a package out to me, a compressed data burst. The last words and this." He worked his jaw, a slight grimace on his face, then reached into his mouth. With a faint click, he popped the cap off a molar that was, in fact, a ceramic prosthetic. He placed a microscopic data chip no bigger than a grain of sand on the table. It was dark and non-reflective. "Old school," he said quietly. "Analog. She always said the most advanced security could be beaten by something the system wasn't designed to look for. This isn't the proof itself, it's the key. The rifle's data core is shielded by a void-maw quantum-entangled encryption grid, supposedly impossible to crack. This is the only way in." The cell door chimed. A bailiff, one of the Goliath maulers from the courtroom and loyal to her, entered with a secure judicial datapad, its casing hardened against electronic intrusion. Tarsus's political maneuvering had failed, so the clock was now ticking until the violent solution arrived. "You're betting everything on this, Reynolds," she said, her voice low, picking up the datapad. It felt heavier than it should. "No," he corrected, his gaze unwavering. "I'm betting on Ashley. She was never wrong." Isolde took a steadying breath. She had spent her life in service to a system of logic and order. Now she was about to stake her career and likely her life on a dead woman's conviction and a smuggler's faith. She took the datapad, her hands steady despite the tremor she felt deep inside her bones. Roric slotted the tiny chip into a microport on the device's side. The key wouldn't allow a full download, its power source was too small, but it would grant a temporary flickering window to view fragments of the core data. Isolde's mind, trained since childhood in the Athelian discipline of total recall, kicked into high gear as chaotic strings of code and alien script flashed across the screen. Her brain captured every line, every character, filing it away with the eidetic recall for which her people were known. Then, the files began to resolve into comprehensible data. They were everything Roric had claimed, and worse. Encrypted payment ledgers from Tarsus's personal accounts, routed through shell corporations on lawless worlds, leading directly to the Void Maw Syndicate, and a full technical schematic for the Singularity Rifle. It didn't create a gravity well, as the rumors suggested. It shunted matter. It worked by opening a pinpoint, targeted wormhole for a nanosecond, erasing its target from real space and depositing its component atoms into the heart of a random star. There was no body, no evidence, no weapon discharge to trace. A perfect assassination tool. Then she saw the final file fragment, a test log, a single horrifying entry. It detailed the weapon's first and only use on a group of listed separatist sympathizers on a mining colony. The result was listed with chilling technical detachment. Total atomic dissolution of all 34 subjects. Target area sterilized. 0 residual evidence. Ashley was right. Roric was right. Her entire world, so carefully constructed from law and logic, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. It was in that moment of devastating revelation that the alarms blared. Red lights flashed through the corridor, bathing the cell in a bloody rhythmic pulse. The synthesized voice of the station AI echoed around them, calm and terrifying. Warning. Unauthorized detonation on judicial level. Hostile forces detected. Containment breach imminent. Roric was on his feet in an instant, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of a life lived in constant peril. Well, look at that, he said, a grim, dangerous smile on his lips. Tarsus's plan B has arrived. The heavy door to the secure cell didn't just open. It bowed inward with a deafening groan of tortured metal, the edges glowing cherry red from a plasma cutter. Then it exploded into a cloud of lethal shrapnel. Framed in the smoking, ruined doorway stood 2 4-armed hecaton, mountains of muscle and fury clad in the black and crimson armor of the Void Maw Syndicate. Their upper arms held heavy plasma repeaters, while their lower arms held shorter, wider-barreled concussion blasters. Roric didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy metal interrogation table, its floor bolts shearing with a scream of protest, and hurled it with a roar at the closest one. In the scant second that bought them, Isolde moved. It was an ingrained reflex, a flow of motion from a part of her life she had buried long ago under robes and gavels. Her Athelian combat training, designed for disabling opponents with minimal effort, took over. She flowed past Roric, her hand striking the second hecaton's primary wrist with the focused, shattering force of a piston. A sickening crack of bone echoed in the cell. The plasma repeater clattered to the floor. Before the creature could process the pain or bring its other weapons to bear, her other hand, fingers rigid, executed a strike to the complex nerve cluster at the base of its thick neck. The behemoth's eyes rolled back, and it collapsed without a sound. Roric stared, his jaw slack. Damn, Judge, you've been holding out on me. The first hecaton recovered, batting the table aside with its lower arms as if it were cardboard. It roared, leveling its weapon. Roric tackled Isolde, sending them both skidding across the floor as a volley of plasma bolts stitched a burning molten line where they'd been standing. As they scrambled up behind the meager cover of the metal bunk, a piece of the ceiling broke loose from the initial explosion. Roric instinctively yanked her clear, a brief, functional contact that sent an unexpected jolt through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the firefight. The pristine white corridor outside had become a war zone. Syndicate mercenaries were locked in a furious firefight with her tribunal guards. "This way!" Roric yelled, his voice tight, pulling her toward a service access panel she hadn't even noticed. "Main corridors are a death trap." They ran. They were a chaotic, brutally effective team. He was the brawling distraction, all kinetic energy and improvisation. She was the scalpel, her movements economical and deadly, each strike aimed at a joint or a nerve. They found a service lift, its doors half open, and descended deep into the city's guts, the station's glittering, orderly superstructure giving way to a dark world of pipes, conduits, and steam. "Plan B?" Isolde asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps as more Void Maw soldiers appeared at the far end of the lower concourse, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the gloom. "Always have a plan B," Roric grinned, pointing to a row of battered, single-person maintenance grav speeders parked in a charging bay. They sprinted for the nearest one, plasma fire sizzling past their heads and ricocheting off the pipes around them. Roric vaulted into the pilot's seat, his fingers finding the ignition conduit under the dash. He stripped the insulation with the flick of a thumbnail and sparked it to life with a bypass shunt he pulled from his belt. Isolde jumped in beside him, her judicial robes tearing on a sharp piece of metal as he slammed the accelerator. The speeder shot out into the neon-lit canyons of the lower city, a world away from the stately order of the levels above. Two Void Maw gunships, sleek and predatory, peeled away from the station and dove after them, their engines screaming. "Hold on!" Roric yelled, weaving the small speeder through congested sky lanes filled with lumbering cargo haulers and public transport barges. "Your piloting is reckless!" Isolde shouted over the roar of the wind and the engine. "Yeah, but is it working?" He shot back with a wild grin that was both terrifying and infectious. The gunships gained on them, their targeting lasers painting a dancing red dot on their speeder's hull. Ahead, Roric pointed to a dense, sparking web of exposed power conduits, an unshielded primary transfer node running between two derelict-leaning buildings. It was a relic of an older, less regulated era of the city's construction. "I need a distraction. Something big." "I have no way to create one. I have no weapon." "Get creative, Judge," he yelled, pushing the speeder even faster, heading directly for the deadly network of energy. Isolde looked at the heavy-duty, solid-state hydrospanner in the tool rack beside her seat. She looked at the volatile power array they were hurtling towards. It was insane. It was a Roric Reynolds kind of plan. It was illogical, unpredictable, and entirely reliant on chance. She hated it. "Reynolds," she said, her voice tight and controlled, cutting through the chaos. "When I tell you, brake left, hard. You got it." They were almost upon the conduits, the air crackling with raw energy, making the hairs on her arms stand up. "Now!" she screamed. Roric wrenched the controls. The speeder veered so violently she was thrown against the door. In the same instant, Isolde stood, braced herself against the frame, and hurled the heavy wrench with all her might. It was an act of Athelian focus, every ounce of her energy channeled into that single, desperate motion. The tool spun end over end into the sparking, chaotic web. It didn't need to be a perfect shot, just a disruptive one. The impact of the conductive metal into the raw energy stream created a cascading overload. A massive, silent, blue-white flower of pure energy bloomed between the buildings. The lead gunship, caught completely by surprise, flew directly into the blast and was instantly vaporized. The second swerved to avoid the first's wreckage and spiraled downwards, trailing smoke. Roric stared at the rearview monitor, his mouth agape. He looked at her, and for a moment, the chaos of the chase fell away. There was a profound and genuine awe. That shared look, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected ferocity and his reckless brilliance, was a bond forged in fire and ozone. Their speeder, however, had been clipped by the electromagnetic pulse from the blast. It sputtered, the engine whining and dying. They began to lose altitude rapidly. "Okay, new plan," Roric said, his voice strained as he fought the controls. "Strategically land in a less than ideal fashion." He guided the dying vehicle toward a glitch zone in the city's deepest underbelly, a warren of forgotten sectors where modern surveillance grids were useless due to overlapping signal interference. They crashed, not gently, into a mountain of discarded tech and scrap metal in a narrow, dripping alley. The impact threw them forward, but they were alive. Roric led her through a maze of dark corridors and rickety walkways to his safe house, a single, cluttered room with a cot against the far wall, a workbench covered in dissected electronics, and the smell of stale synth coffee and ozone. "It's not the High Tribunal, but the rent's cheaper," he said, rummaging through a medkit on a dusty shelf. He gestured to the cot. "Sit down. You took a plasma scorch to the back during the escape." She complied, her body suddenly screaming with a dozen different aches. The adrenaline was fading. She turned, pulling aside the torn and blackened fabric on her formal robes. His fingers, surprisingly gentle, brushed her skin as he applied a cool, stinging burn salve. An involuntary shiver ran through her. As he worked, his fingers traced the edge of an old, jagged scar on her shoulder blade, a puckered, silvery line against her pale skin. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Isolde froze. The question was a key turning in a lock she had sealed decades ago. The scar was a mark of shame, a permanent reminder of her greatest failure. "It's nothing," she said, her voice stiff and formal, a shield snapping into place. He didn't press. He finished applying the salve, then shrugged off his own jacket. She saw it then, a massive, brutal scar that cut across the muscles of his back, a horrific branching pattern like petrified lightning. Her question was a whisper, escaping before she could stop it. "What happened to you?" His playful demeanor fell away completely, replaced by a raw, unguarded grief that stole the air from the room. "Malix," he said. The name a curse spat into the silence. "The Void Maw enforcer who runs Tarsus's network. My partner, Ashley, the job where she got the key for the rifle. It was a trap. Malix was there. She died getting me out. He used a hecaton executioner's blade on her. I got this, trying to pull her away from him." In that moment, she saw it all. The swagger, the grin, the chaos. It was armor. All of it was armor, built piece by piece around a hollowed-out core of love and loss. She rose from the cot, and her fingers, of their own volition, moved to gently trace the edge of his scar. The damaged tissue was rough beneath her touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the words were not a formality. She meant them. The shared vulnerability hung in the air between them, a fragile, trembling bridge across the vast chasm of their differences. "What now, Judge?" he asked, his voice raw. "We must find a way to decrypt the full data file and transmit it to a trusted source," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its old authority as she retreated to the familiar ground of strategy. "To whom?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Tarsus has the High Council in his pocket. The Concord Guard is compromised. There are no trusted sources." Logic, rules, systems. That is what gets people like Ashley killed. And your chaos is what led her into that trap in the first place, Isolde retorted, the words a low blow, an instinctual lashing out she instantly regretted. His anger seemed to vanish, replaced by a quiet, piercing intensity. He stepped closer, his hand coming up, his fingertips hovering near her hidden scar, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin. No. This isn't about logic versus chaos. It's about this. He looked from her shoulder to her eyes. The perfect judge with the imperfect mark. You want to know what this scar is from? It was my final Athelian trial, the test of unflinching will. I was meant to endure a series of painful stimuli without reacting, to prove my mind's dominion over my body. But during the test, my sparring partner's energy blade overloaded. It was going to explode. The rules said to hold my position. Logic said his fate was his own. I broke formation. I tackled him out of the way just as it blew. I saved his life, and they failed me for it. They said I let sentiment override discipline. They scarred me as a reminder that I was flawed. He met her eyes, and she felt utterly, terrifyingly exposed. You're not afraid of Tarsus, Isolde. You're afraid of making another mistake. You've spent your entire life hiding behind the law because it gives you rules for everything, a way to never be wrong again. You're afraid of feeling anything that isn't pre-approved by a statute. The dam of her composure, cracked for years, finally detonated. He saw her. He saw the truth she had hidden from everyone, even from herself. It was terrifying. It was infuriating. And, in a strange, breathtaking way, it was liberating. She surged forward and slammed him against the wall, her hands fisted in his shirt. He looked stunned for a fraction of a second, then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. There she is, he whispered. She crushed her mouth to his. The kiss was a collision of worlds, a fusion of order and chaos. It was years of her repressed passion crashing against the wall of his guarded heart. They fell onto the single cot, a tangle of limbs and bruised emotions, remaking their broken universe into something new and savage and real. In the quiet aftermath, lying together in the cluttered darkness, they were no longer a judge and a smuggler. They were partners. They forged a new plan, a fusion of their two natures. We bluff, Roric said, his voice a low murmur against her hair. We can't crack the whole file here, but we can make them think we can. We leak a message to the underworld that we're selling the decryption key to the highest bidder. Malix's ego will not allow the data to fall into a rival's hands, Isolde added, her mind already working, fitting the pieces together. He will come himself. The location must be specific, a place that gives us an advantage. Her eyes unfocused for a moment. The abandoned Icarus refinery in the Amber Nebula. Its core is built around a massive, unstable thorium lattice. I'll tip off the one honest Concord marshal I know, a man named Hasek, a three-way party. The endgame? Roric asked. The truth, she said, a fierce light in her eyes he had never seen before. We use your ship's comms array, slaved to the safe house's power grid, to finish decrypting the full data log. We link it to a dead man's switch on my biometric signal. The moment the trap is sprung, or if my life signs cease, the file gets blasted to every independent news network in the Concord. He stared at her, full of an admiration that went beyond awe. Let's go raise some hell, Kalos. She smiled at the use of her name. They fought their way out of the glitch zone, a desperate running battle through the underbelly of the city to the illicit hangar where he kept the stray comet. They escaped to orbit just ahead of a Concorde patrol that was almost certainly under Tarsus's control. Once in the quiet of space, Roric cast his digital net into the murky depths of the underworld. The Icarus refinery was a skeletal ghost clinging to a giant, glowing thorium asteroid. They landed the comet on the main platform. They didn't have to wait long. A single menacing warship, its hull the color of dried blood, dropped out of FTL. Malix's ship. "He's not coming down himself," Roric noted, watching the shuttle descend from the warship's belly. "He's not that stupid. He's sending his favorite psycho." The shuttle ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Out strode Draznok, Malix's companion, a massive hecaton famed for his brutality and his collection of skulls from a dozen species. And in his lower hands, he held it, the Singularity Rifle. "Reynolds!" Draznok's voice boomed across the platform, amplified and distorted by his helmet. "Lord Malix sends his regards, and your oblivion." "Tell Corby I'm touched," Roric shouted back. He glanced at Isolde, who was concealed behind a large piece of mining equipment, her finger hovering over the transmit button on her datapad. "Ready with the fireworks?" "The databomb is primed and linked," she confirmed, her voice calm in his earcom. Just then, 3 Concorde patrol cruisers materialized in a flash of displaced space-time. Marshal Hasek had arrived, just as she'd predicted. "Now, Isolde!" Roric yelled. She hit the transmit button. The databomb was away, an unstable torrent of truth flooding the galactic infosphere. Draznok saw the Concorde ships and roared in fury, instantly realizing the trap. He raised the rifle, aiming it squarely at Roric. But at that moment, Hasek's lead cruiser fired a warning shot, a lance of pure energy that impacted the platform nearby. The shockwave threw Draznok off balance. The Singularity Rifle flew from his grasp, skittering across the metal deck. In the ensuing 3-way firefight between Void Maw's shuttle, Hasek's ships, and the refinery's automated defenses that sputtered to life, Roric dove for the weapon. His fingers closed around the strange alien alloy of its stock. He aimed at Draznok, who was scrambling to his feet, but the interface was a cascade of alien runes he couldn't read. "Reynolds?" Isolde's voice cut through the noise of battle, a testament to her flawless recall of schematics she had glimpsed for only a moment. "The Amberlit rune, upper left quadrant. Press and hold to prime the shunt sequence." His eyes found it. He pressed it. The rifle whined, a low, hungry sound. Vengeance for Ashley was in his hands. He could erase this monster from existence. He looked from Draznok's snarling face to the massive, glowing thorium asteroid the refinery was built on. Not vengeance. A bigger mess. He pivoted, the rifle heavy in his hands, and fired at the unstable lattice core of the asteroid itself. A pinpoint rift, a tiny dot of absolute blackness, tore into the asteroid. The shunting of a few tons of matter from its core triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The asteroid began to collapse, a violent, silent implosion, dragging the refinery and everything on it into a swirling vortex of gravitational collapse. "The shuttle!" Isolde yelled, but it was already lifting off, Draznok scrambling back aboard just as the ramp closed. "Plan C!" Roric shouted, pulling her toward a different part of the station as the platform buckled beneath their feet. "Maintenance bay! There have to be escape pods!" They ran, dodging girders and panels of metal that were being torn from the station's superstructure. They found the bay just as its outer wall sheared away, revealing a single antiquated service skiff still in its magnetic dock. They leaped across the widening, terrifying gap, piling inside as Roric fired up the ancient engine. They blasted away from the dying refinery just as it was consumed by the swirling, silent vortex, a terrifying and beautiful exclamation point to the truth now flooding the galaxy. Floating in the battered, cramped skiff, they watched the last remnants of Icarus vanish. They were bruised, exhausted, homeless, and victorious. The Concord was in turmoil. Tarsus was finished, and they were the two most wanted people in the known universe. Roric leaned back, a genuine tired smile on his face. "So, Judge," he said, the name now a familiar, affectionate endearment. She leaned across the small cockpit and kissed him, long and slow and full of promise. "Somewhere with a bigger bed," she replied, a rare, breathtaking smile on her lips. "And somewhere we can find some real justice, the kind that doesn't come from a courtroom." She looked at him, her gaze a challenge and an invitation. "And I suspect you know exactly where to find the most trouble." He grinned, his fingers dancing over the navigation console, keying in random coordinates to the uncharted black beyond the outer rim. "Hold on," he said. Together, they jumped to FTL, leaving the wreckage of their old lives behind for the chaotic, beautiful, and unknown promise of a new one.